I'm Shannon Doherty, and this is VH1 Presents The 80s. The 80s was a decade when bigger was considered better, and no music reflected that attitude like heavy metal. In the 80s, the stage shows were bigger, the hair was bigger, and for a while, it looked like metal's audience would keep getting bigger and bigger. In this hour, we will take a look at the rise and fall of 80s metal.
In the 1980s, sales of diamonds, champagne, and American stock shot up. Being an investment banker suddenly became cool. And an expensive, mean-spirited drug began to fuel the work and play of the rich. An age of excess needed a music of excess, and heavy metal stepped up to meet the challenge.
Heavy metal room!
With grandiose stage shows, amped-up guitar solos, and offstage troublemaking, metal rockers suited the mood of the decade almost too well.
The perception of metal bands, the decadence and the backstage parties and the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll, it's pretty much all true.
Before long, metal moved to the forefront of pop music. But when the era of excess came to a close, metal's popularity ended with it.
It become pantomime, it become Liberace, and it's a shame, really, because it didn't start off that way.
At the dawn of the decade, heavy metal was on the verge of becoming irrelevant. Drug problems and revolving lineups had sidelined many hard rock acts of the 70s. And the energy and commitment of punk made heavy metal's gothic posturing seem archaic. Punk's stripped-down sound influenced what was being called the new wave of British heavy metal, spearheaded by groups like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Motorhead.
There were bands like Motorhead that were able successfully early on to combine the best aspects of heavy metal with the best aspects of punk rock.
They were like the first hard rock heavy metal band that it was okay for the punks to like. Like you could be a punk rock guy with a Motorhead patch on the back of your jacket.
Breaking the law, breaking the law.
But the new wave of British metal was largely ignored by American audiences, who favored more accessible rock acts like Foreigner and Journey.
I think that people looked at metal as a threat. What is this loud, abrasive, obnoxious music with these big, heavy riffs and, you know, strange, evil language? What does it mean?
In 1980, the pioneers of metal, Led Zeppelin, announced dates for a U.S. tour. Venues were booked and tickets went on sale, but the tour never happened. On September 25th, drummer John Bonham died after a night of heavy drinking. Within weeks, Zeppelin called it quits.
When John Bonham passed away, what I think was the most heartbreaking thing about that as a fan of their music was that I would never see the original lineup play. And for a fan like me who has everything Zeppelin has ever made, created, written, you know, it was devastating.
Instead of calling it quits, AC/DC replaced Scott with Brian Johnson.
AC/DC was one of those bands that just turned me on. It was like you put on an AC/DC record and it hit a certain nerve in me that's indescribable.
Angus Young and his very snotty, spoiled attitude imagery with the schoolboy uniform, his brother holding down a very serious rhythm guitar, and made the songs fantastic, and they were all about sexual innuendo and partying.
It was the most basic, stripped-down rock thing. It was tribal almost. Yeah.
But the band who created the model for heavy metal success in the 80s was Van Halen.
Van Halen doesn't play heavy metal. Van Halen plays what we call big rock.
The Los Angeles Quartet became one of rock's most popular bands in the late 70s. But in the 80s, their mix of complex instrumentation and over-the-top theatrics re-energized American hard rock.
Van Halen were amazing. They showed you that you could be technically proficient and energetic and showy all in one. David Lee Roth is one of the few front men that I personally think is worth his salt.
David Lee Roth epitomized the front man with just sheer, uninhibited you attitude while not offending anybody.
true rock and roll should have no perimeters to it. It should have no, you can only go this far. You can only talk about this and that kind of. I'm not interested. For me, this is just one big wet T-shirt contest.
Along comes Eddie Van Halen, smiling, sliding, spinning, flying, and reinventing the guitar.
He's one of the best guitar players in the world. And he had his own style, very busy style. His sense of tapping started that whole school.
As Van Halen was redefining the way heavy metal could be played, they were also raising the bar for living large, earning a reputation for their notorious backstage antics.
During the concert, David Lee Roth claims to be actively searching out girls from the stage. When he spots a girl in the audience he thinks is cute, he dances over to the side of the stage while Eddie takes a guitar solo. Oh, this is pitiful. There he will shout something to an available roadie like red right, red T-shirt, out of sight, 6 feet back. While David dances back to the microphone, a roadie in the front row will receive a radio communique from the stage. Then he will go to work to find the girl and give her a pass. Now, is there a hint of truth anywhere in this?
Well, you want to interact with the audience as closely as possible. Music is a sharing experience.
Van Halen's success shifted the heavy metal capital of the world from the UK to Southern California. The bands that would come out of the Los Angeles club scene made metal's unapologetically trashy style seem more fun than dangerous. And the bands also forced the world to accept a new icon of 80s manhood, the guy with makeup, tight pants, and big hair.